This is the story of Germany's Spruchkammer courts, the long road of denazification, and how we can learn from their example. Right now, in 2025, America is experiencing something deeply troubling. The FBI reports hate crimes at their highest levels since they started tracking in 1991. Nearly 12,000 incidents in 2023 alone. Just last week, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated at a speaking event. MAGA rapper Forgiato Blow just released a song on Apple Music calling for lynchings.
Whoa, we need a big tall tree and a short piece of rope. Hang 'em up high at sundown. Leave 'em swinging so the folks all know you don't mess around in our town. A big tall tree and a short piece of rope. Hang 'em up high at sundown. Leave 'em swinging so the folks all know you don't mess around in our town.
Death threats against public officials have reached record highs, with 180 federal arrests in 2024. But here's what gives me hope. Germany faced something far worse and found a way through. Not a perfect way, not an easy way, but a way that worked. And understanding their journey might help us find our own path forward. Picture this. It's April 1946. World War II just ended. The Allies face an impossible question. What do you do with 8.5 million Nazi Party members? How do you rebuild a democracy when nearly every judge, teacher, and government official was part of the Nazi machine? When children were raised in the Nazi youth? The answer came in the form of something called Spruchkammer courts. Think of them as civilian tribunals, like a cross between a courtroom and a town hall meeting. The Americans set up 545 of these courts across their occupation zone, staffing them with 22,000 Germans who'd opposed the Nazis. Their job? To investigate and classify every single adult German based on their involvement with the Nazi regime. The counterpiece of this process was the Fragebogen, a questionnaire with 131 questions that dug into every aspect of a person's life. It asked about everything. When did you join the Nazi Party? What was your member number? Did you belong to the Hitler Youth, the SS? Did you profit from Jewish businesses being seized? Did you ever help someone escape persecution? Every German adult had to fill this out. Lying meant prison. The forms were cross-checked against Nazi Party records that surprisingly survived the war largely intact. If you claimed you never joined the party but your membership card said otherwise, you were caught. The 131 questions on the Fragebogen weren't just bureaucratic paperwork. They were a psychological excavation of an entire society. Some questions were straightforward. Were you a member of the Nazi Party? If yes, what was your membership number? But then came the question that mattered most. When did you join? See, joining before May 1st, 1937 meant you were a true believer who joined when the Nazis were still consolidating power. Joining after meant you probably did it for your career. That single date could determine whether you were classified as an offender or just a follower. The questionnaire got personal fast. Did your income increase by more than 20% after 1933? It revealed who profited from the regime without asking directly. Did you acquire Jewish property or benefit from Aryanization? This question forced people to admit they'd stolen from their neighbors. Some questions created impossible situations. Did you know about the concentration camps? If you said yes, you admitted complicity. If you said no, you admitted willful ignorance. Why didn't you resist? Had no good answer. If you didn't join the party, how did you keep your job? There was no neutral ground with a lot of these questions. But they were designed to root out honesty, and they were designed to make the point that if you didn't resist, you were guilty. The questionnaire asked about your children. Did they attend Adolf Hitler's schools? Were they in the Hitler Youth? The answer for pretty much everybody was yes. It was a requirement at a certain point. The investigators knew most parents couldn't have kept their kids out without consequences. They asked about the small things that revealed big truths. Did you use the Hitler greeting regularly? Did you display Nazi symbols in your home? Did you own or distribute copies of Mein Kampf? These weren't crimes exactly, but they showed enthusiasm versus mere compliance. The most dangerous questions were about others. Did you ever denounce anyone to the Gestapo? List 5 people who can verify your statements. Those 5 people would be contacted and asked about you. If you listed fellow Nazis, that looked bad. If you listed resistance members, they might expose your lies. The denouncement program was a method of keeping people in line. People were denounced for all sorts of things. Teachers were denounced by students for assigning too much homework. Others were denounced for talking about communism in a bar. Even in an academic way, it didn't have to be positive toward communism. Many denouncements were obviously sinister too. Kids would denounce their parents for not greeting them with Heil Hitler every morning. There was a culture of mass surveillance. People's phone lines were tapped. They answered the phone with anything other than Heil Hitler, they'd find themselves in a much worse position in life. They might be fired from their job, or they might find themselves on the front lines instead of in a safer position when or if they're drafted to fight in the war. Either way, the Gestapo investigated every single denouncement, even the ones for too much homework. They'd show up at the school, ask questions about the teacher, talk to the family members, and leave. Sometimes it came to nothing. Sometimes they'd be out of a job. One teacher made a lighthearted joke that was interpreted as negative toward the regime, and just like that, they found themselves jobless. Mass firings were a social weapon wielded by the state and by society. Maybe the most psychologically devastating section in the questionnaire came at the end. Describe any actions you took against the Nazi regime. List any assistance you gave to persecuted persons. Provide names and addresses of people you helped. For most Germans, these sections remained blank, forcing them to confront on paper that they'd done nothing while their neighbors disappeared. The questionnaire even trapped people who tried to be clever. One question asked about travel: list all trips outside Germany from 1933 to 1945. The Allies had passport records. If you lied here, they knew you'd lie anywhere. Another asked which political party you supported before 1933. They could check voting records from some districts. Every lie was a thread that, when pulled, could unravel your entire story. The court sorted people into 5 categories, each with different consequences. Category 1, major offenders. These are the war criminals, concentration camp commanders, and high-ranking SS officers. Only 1,600 people ended up here, about 0.1% of those processed. They faced death sentences or life imprisonment, though most got lesser sentences. This doesn't include the arch criminals, which face Nuremberg trials. Category 2, offenders. Active Nazis who pushed the ideology forward. Business leaders who used slave labor. Lower-level party officials. About 22,000 people, or 1.3%. They faced up to 10 years in prison and lost their property. Category 3, lesser offenders. People who joined for career advancement but weren't true believers. About 106,000 people, or 6.4%. Category 2 might include ICE officers today. Category 3, lesser offenders. People who joined for career advancement but weren't true believers. About 106,000 people, or 6.4%. They got probation and couldn't hold leadership positions for a few years. This would be like ICE officials who were enticed by the signing bonus, but maybe weren't true believers. Category 4, followers. The vast majority of people fell into this category, almost 1 million. 57% of those processed. These were the go-along-to-get-along crowd. They paid small fines and moved on with their lives. Category 5, exonerated. People who actively resisted or helped victims. About 580,000 people, or 35%, fell into this one. They were cleared completely and often got priority for jobs in the new democracy. Here's where things got messy. Germans could get character references called Persilschein, named after Persil laundry detergent because they washed you clean of Nazi guilt. Suddenly, everyone had a story about how they secretly helped a Jewish neighbor or resisted Nazi orders. A black market emerged. You could buy a Persilschein from someone willing to lie for you. The courts got overwhelmed trying to figure out which stories were real. One historian called the whole system a Mitlauferfabrik, a follower factory, because it mass-produced Category 4 classifications, letting most people off with a slap on the wrist. By 1948, even the Americans admitted the system was failing. One British observer joked that Hitler said the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. He survived the first 12, and denazification would easily take the remaining 988. The Cold War was starting, and the West needed Germany as an ally against the Soviet Union. Thorough denazification got pushed aside for practical politics. Additionally, if the leaders of industry who supported the Nazi cause were jailed, their food distribution and economy would completely collapse. It was already hanging on by a thread. The Americans didn't want to be responsible for feeding the Germans, so they allowed some important, influential, and experienced business leaders to escape with no punishments. Here's the twist. Even though the Spruchkammer courts mostly failed in their immediate goal, they planted seeds that would bloom decades later. The courts forced millions of Germans to fill out those questionnaires, to think about their choices, to face, even briefly, what they had done or allowed to happen. The real transformation didn't come from the courts themselves. It came from what Germany built afterward. And this is where the story gets hopeful, because it shows that even after the worst evil imaginable, a society can change. The breakdown came in the 1960s. By then, many Germans wanted to forget the Nazi era, but a new generation was coming of age. Kids born during or after the war who started asking their parents uncomfortable questions. What did you do during the war, Dad? Why didn't you resist? In 1960 and 1962, German education ministries made a crucial decision. Every student would learn about the Holocaust, not as an ancient history, but as something their parents and grandparents participated in or allowed. By the 1970s, this is mandatory in grades 9 and 10. Today, pretty much no German student graduates without visiting a concentration camp, hearing the Holocaust survivors, and grappling with how ordinary people became mass murderers. The real earthquake came with the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials from 1963 to 1965. For 183 days, Germans heard testimony from 359 witnesses, including 210 concentration camp survivors. The trials were broadcast on radio and covered extensively in newspapers. For the first time, many Germans couldn't avoid the brutal details of what happened in the camps. Then came 1968. Students across Germany rose up, demanding their universities fire professors who'd been Nazis. They occupied buildings and held alternative classes about the Nazi past. They went home and confronted their parents directly. Were you a Nazi? What did you know? And why didn't you stop it? At the end of the day, it was a shame movement. They shamed and embarrassed their family members for participating, or at a minimum, doing nothing. There was one case immediately after the war where they were trying to reestablish their economy, and a worker showed up to a construction site with the only boots he owned, stormtrooper boots. They told him to leave and don't come back until he gets another pair of boots. People hid their artifacts in an attic or burned it out of embarrassment. This process wasn't easy or peaceful. Families split apart. Some parents never spoke to their children again, but it broke the silence. It ended the conspiracy of forgetting. Not every Nazi stayed a Nazi. Some genuinely transformed, though separating real change from convenient reinvention was hard. Take Hans Munch, a doctor at Auschwitz. After the war, he was one of the few camp personnel acquitted. Witnesses testified he'd refused to participate in selections and tried to help prisoners. The selection process is where they'd walk the incoming prisoners past doctors at the concentration camp, and they'd select the ones that went to the forced labor camp, the ones that went to the crematorium, and the ones that would be used for medical experiments. In 1995, at the age of 84, he met Eva Moses Kor, who survived medical experiments as a child. She'd contacted him because she needed someone to confirm the gas chambers existed, to fight Holocaust deniers. Munch treated her with respect and showed genuine remorse. At the 50th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation, he publicly testified about the gas chambers. Then something extraordinary happened. Eva forgave him, not for his sake, but for hers. She said, "I realized I had power over my life. I had the power to heal the pain imposed on me in Auschwitz by forgiving the people who imposed that pain." Not all survivors agreed with her choice. Many said the crimes were unforgivable. But Eva's act showed that even after the worst evil, some form of healing was possible. The most powerful stories often came from the next generation. Rainer Haas, grandson of Auschwitz Commandant Rudolf Haas, broke with his family's silence and denial. His relatives called him a traitor, but he travels to schools teaching about the Holocaust. In 2013, he met Eva Kor at Auschwitz. He said, "It was probably the most difficult day of my life, but also liberating." Germany didn't just rely on individual transformation. They built legal walls against Nazism's return. The German Constitution, written in 1949, it starts with 5 words that changed everything. Human dignity shall be inviolable, meaning it can never be violated. This became the cornerstone that made any return to Nazi ideology legally impossible. They created something called militant democracy. Democracy that actively defends itself. Unlike America, where even hate speech is mostly protected, Germany said, you can't use democratic freedoms to destroy democracy. If your political party wants to overthrow democracy, it gets banned. If you deny the Holocaust, you go to prison for up to 5 years. If you display a swastika, that's 3 years. In 1952, they banned the Socialist Reich Party as a Nazi successor organization. When new far-right parties emerged, the Constitutional Court could strip their funding or ban them entirely. It's controversial. Many Americans would see it as censorship. But Germans decided that after what happened, some ideas are too dangerous to tolerate. And that brings me to the paradox of intolerance. Just a reminder, I would really appreciate it if you guys checked out my Patreon. If you're not going to donate, you don't have to, but follow me there at the very least. owenmorgan.com/Patreon. Just in case some thing happens with the government or whatever, it would be really good if you had some way to connect with me and my content. I'm really concerned about that, and maybe you should consider that for other creators too. The idea is simple but profound. If a society is tolerant without any limits, its ability to be tolerant will eventually be seized or destroyed by the intolerant. It's like letting a wolf into the sheep pen because you believe in the wolf's freedom of movement. Pretty soon you won't have any sheep left to protect. Here's a real example from Germany in the 1930s. The Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic government before Hitler, was extremely tolerant. They allowed the Nazi Party to operate legally, to spread propaganda, hold rallies, and participate in elections, all while the Nazis openly declared that they would destroy democracy once in power. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, literally said in 1935, "We entered parliament in order to supply ourselves, in the arsenal of democracy, with its own weapons. If democracy is so stupid as to give us free tickets and salaries for this work, that is its affair." The Nazis used democratic freedoms, free speech, free assembly, free press, to build a movement dedicated to ending those very freedoms. Once they gained power in 1933, they immediately banned all other political parties, shut down opposition newspapers, and made criticism of the regime punishable by death. Democracy had tolerated itself to death. That is why post-war Germany decided that unlimited tolerance is actually a form of negligence. It's not censorship to stop someone from burning down the theater. It's protecting everyone's right to enjoy the show. Germany learned that when someone says, "I want to use democracy to destroy democracy," you should believe them and stop them, not hand them the matches and hope they're joking. Here's how we know Germany's approach succeeded. In 1946, 40% of Germans said Nazism was a good idea, badly executed. By 1952, it was 44%. Denazification was so unpopular, it actually increased Nazi sympathy temporarily. But look at today. Less than 5% of Germans support explicitly Nazi positions. From 1957 to 2017, 60 years, no far-right party won seats in the German parliament. Compare that to France, where the far-right National Rally gets 25 to 30% of votes, or Italy, where far-right parties combined get 35 to 40%. Germany's far-right AfD party, while concerning at 20% support, remains a minority, and their strongest in former East Germany, where Soviet-style denazification failed to address private beliefs. The real victory shows in German culture. When refugees arrived in 2015, most Germans welcomed them, a complete reversal from the racial ideology of the 1930s. Germany has some of Europe's strongest hate crime laws and most comprehensive Holocaust education. German cities have placed over 116,000 Stolpersteine, or stumbling stones, brass plaques in sidewalks marking where Holocaust victims lived, making memory part of daily life. There's an important lesson in how East and West Germany approached denazification differently. East Germany declared itself an anti-fascist state and claimed it had eliminated Nazism completely. They removed all Nazi symbols, renamed streets, and made anti-fascism part of state ideology. But they never dealt with what happened in people's hearts and homes. They blamed fascism on capitalism and said West Germany was the real Nazi successor. They didn't encourage families to talk about grandpa's role in the war. They used anti-fascism as propaganda rather than genuine self-examination. The result? After reunification in 1990, extremism exploded in Eastern Germany. Today, the far-right AfD gets about 22% support in the East versus 11% in the West. The lesson is clear. You can't defeat extremism through force and propaganda alone. Real change requires honest conversation, even when it's painful. And for the record, Antifa means something a little different today than it did back then. The communists in the time and region were genuinely dangerous, violent, hateful people. The communists would trade shot for shot and punch for punch in the streets with the Nazis, according to historian Richard J. Evans. But after the Nazis took political power, communism was banned, and people were heavily persecuted and accused of being communist, even when they weren't. The Communist Party created a protective militant group that would follow people to and from work to make sure they weren't harassed. The militant group received weapons training and was involved in community organizing. The group was called Antifa, or anti-fascist. Again, the communists and Antifa at the time were violent extremists. However, the Social Democrats had a militant group that protected people too, called the Iron Front. Their symbol was the three arrows. The 3 arrows were spray painted over swastikas to deface them. They meant no monarchy, no communism, no Nazism. It was eventually identified as a hate group just like Antifa was by the Nazi Party. Now let's talk about America today, because the parallels are impossible to ignore. We're seeing warning signs that Germans from the 1930s would recognize. Musicians are releasing songs with lyrics about a big tall tree and a short piece of rope, calling to hang 'em up high at sundown.
Whoa, we need a big tall tree and a short piece of rope. Hang 'em up high at sundown. Leave 'em swinging so the folks all know you don't mess around in our town.
Explicitly referencing the lynchings that killed countless Americans, mostly black, between 1865 and 1950. These aren't on hidden or obscure websites. They're on Apple Music, Spotify, and Tidal. It's even on YouTube. One song by rapper Forgiato Blow called Good vs. Evil directly calls for racial violence, saying we ought to do it like they did way back in the day because Granddaddy's way works best.
We ought to do it like they did it way back in the day, 'cause Granddaddy's way works best.
Trump's recent declaration of Antifa as a terrorist organization, though legally meaningless since there's no mechanism for domestic terrorism designations, shows how extremist rhetoric has entered the highest levels of government. Constitutional experts note this would violate the First Amendment, but the gesture itself normalizes treating political opponents as enemies of the state. Here's what Germany teaches us about defeating extremism. First, it takes time. Decades, not years. Germany didn't transform overnight. It took 20 years before they truly confronted their past, and another 20 to build a stable anti-extremist consensus. America shouldn't expect quick fixes. Second, education is everything. Every German student learns about the Holocaust, visits memorials, hears from survivors. They learn how ordinary people became killers, how democracy died step by step. American schools need similar programs about slavery, Jim Crow, Japanese internment, Native American genocide, not to create guilt, but to create awareness of how hate grows. Third, you need legal guardrails. America can't ban speech like Germany. Our First Amendment wouldn't allow it. But we can strengthen hate crime laws, improve threat prosecution, and hold platforms accountable for hosting calls to violence. Germany's Network of Enforcement Act requires social media companies to remove illegal content within 24 hours or face fines up to 50 million euros. We could adapt this for content that directly incites violence. Fourth, personal transformation is possible, but complicated. The Spruchkammer courts show that most people will minimize their involvement and avoid real accountability. But some individuals genuinely change, especially when confronted by victims or forced to face consequences. America needs programs helping extremists leave hate groups. Germany's exit program has helped over 600 neo-Nazis leave the movement with only 3% returning. Fifth, documentation matters. The Nazis kept meticulous records, which made prosecution possible. Today's extremists often document themselves online. These digital footprints matter. When someone posts death threats or celebrates violence, that evidence needs preservation for future accountability. Sixth, civil society must lead. Government programs alone don't change hearts. Germany's transformation came from students challenging parents, journalists investigating crimes, teachers changing curricula, and ordinary citizens demanding accountability. Americans can't wait for Washington to solve it. Change happens in families, schools, and communities. Shame is our most powerful tool at this moment, and when Democrats take control of the government again, Spruchkammer-adjacent court systems will be. Let's be honest about the challenges America faces that Germany didn't. Our First Amendment protects hate speech in ways Germany's constitution doesn't. We can't ban Nazi symbols or prosecute Holocaust denial. This is a feature of American democracy, not a bug, but it means we need different tools. Germany after 1945 had external occupiers forcing change. America must transform itself while half the country disagrees on whether there's even a problem. Some see anti-racism education as an attack on white children. Others see it as an essential truth. We have social media. Extremism spreads faster online than through 1930s newspapers and radio. But this also means documentation is better. Extremists often convict themselves through their own posts. Also, we have more guns. Germany disarmed after World War II. America has more civilian firearms than people. This makes political violence deadlier and harder to prevent. Here are some practical steps that you can take. Document everything. When you see extremist content online, screenshot it before it's deleted. Report it to the platforms and law enforcement. Create evidence trails. And if nothing else, save it in a folder on your computer. Keep a journal that details the process, step by step. Journals and diaries were extremely valuable for helping prosecutors piece things together after the war. They can censor the media, but they can't censor your own journal. And when we have 50,000 journals all saying the same thing, like the fact that Brian Kilmeade called for euthanizing homeless people live on air, it's hard to ignore.
Billions of dollars to mental health and the homeless population. A lot of them don't want to take the programs. A lot of them don't want to get the help that is necessary. You can't give them a choice. Either you take the resources that we're going to give you, or you decide that you're going to be locked up in jail. That's the way it has to be now.
Or involuntary lethal injection or something. Just kill them.
Yeah, Brian, why did it have to get to this point?
Right.
Kilmeade would probably be considered a 1 on the Spruchkammer court's scale, a criminal directly responsible for the deaths of countless people as a propagandist for the state. Here's the next thing you can do. Have uncomfortable conversations. Like German students in 1968, ask family members about their beliefs. Challenge racist jokes. Don't let extremism become normal through silence. If you're scrolling through Facebook and you see some nutcase family member talking about how black people should be lynched or something, challenge it. Don't let the next family member scroll by and see that and think it's normal. It's not. Next, support education. Advocate for honest history teaching in schools. Volunteer to share stories of discrimination and resistance. Fund programs that teach critical thinking and media literacy. Build bridges. Germany succeeded partly because former enemies became allies. Find common ground with people you disagree with. Extremism thrives on division. Democracy thrives on connection. If you have a problem with somebody on the left, get over it. Work with them. We cannot afford to be divided right now. Learn the history. Read about how other societies defeated hate movements. Understanding patterns help recognize warning signs and effective responses. And finally, vote and volunteer. Support candidates who defend democracy regardless of party. Volunteer for civil rights organizations, anti-hate groups, and community programs that bring people together. Even today, people leave hate behind. Christian Piccolini, a former neo-Nazi leader, now helps others escape extremism. He co-founded Life After Hate, which has helped hundreds leave white supremacist movements. He says the key was when people he'd been taught to hate showed him compassion instead of contempt. Derek Black, son of former KKK Grand Wizard and godson of David Duke, left white nationalism after befriending Jewish students in college. They invited him to Shabbat dinners despite knowing his background. Through patient dialogue, not confrontation, they helped him see his ideology's flaws. He now speaks against white nationalism and studies how extremism spreads. These stories don't excuse past hate or minimize harm caused, but they show transformation is possible when people are given paths out and reasons to change. Germany is adapting its anti-extremism work for the internet age. Their Network Enforcement Act makes platforms remove illegal hate speech quickly. Exit Germany uses former extremists to engage with current ones online, speaking their language and understanding their grievances while offering alternatives. America could adapt these approaches with our constitutional framework. We can't ban hate speech, but platforms can enforce terms of service. We can't force people to de-radicalize, but we can fund voluntary programs. We can't control what people think, but we can ensure accurate history is taught and extremist violence is prosecuted. The digital age also offers opportunities. Extremists used to recruit in secret. Now they often do it publicly online, making monitoring easier. Counter-narratives can spread as fast as hate. Former extremists can reach current ones directly through social media. Some argue America can't learn from Germany because our histories and laws differ. That's partially true. We can't simply copy their approach. But core lessons transcend specific contexts. Legal accountability, while imperfect, matters. Germany shows that defeating extremism isn't about converting true believers. Most won't change. It's about preventing their ideology from spreading, protecting vulnerable targets, maintaining democratic institutions, and ensuring the next generation learns history's lessons. Germans who lived through the 1930s often say they didn't see it coming until it was too late. The economy was bad, people were angry, someone offered simple solutions, and someone to blame. Violence started small, a broken window here, a beating there, then escalated until it seemed normal. America isn't 1930s Germany, but we're seeing similar patterns. Economic anxiety despite overall prosperity, scapegoating of minorities for complex problems, political violence becoming normalized, democratic norms being eroded, truth becoming negotiable. This stuff requires response. The Frankfurt Auschwitz trials prosecutor Fritz Bauer once said, "Nothing belongs to the past. Everything is still present and can become future again at any moment." Germany learned this lesson through catastrophe. It looks like America's learning it through catastrophe as well. But the pendulum will swing. Defeating extremism in America won't be easy or quick. It'll take decades of patient work in schools, communities, and families. It'll demand that we defend democracy actively, not assume it maintains itself. But it's possible. Germany transformed from the most genocidal regime in history to one of the world's most stable democracies. They did it through education, legal accountability, cultural transformation, and most importantly, ordinary citizens deciding that never again meant something. America has advantages Germany lacked. We're transforming ourselves, not being transformed by occupiers. We have Germany's example to learn from. We have stronger democratic traditions to build on. We have incredible diversity that, while sometimes causing tension, also provides resilience against singular extremist narratives. White supremacists are in the minority here. The Spruchkammer courts failed in their immediate goal but succeeded in something deeper. They showed that while you can't force people to change their hearts through tribunals, you can create conditions where change becomes possible. Human nature contains both tremendous evil and tremendous good. The same species that produced Auschwitz also produced those who hid Jewish families in their attics. The same country that embraced Hitler later elected leaders who made Holocaust education mandatory. The same people who participated in genocide raised children who demanded accountability. This is humanity's burden and hope. We're capable of horror, but we're also capable of transformation. Not perfect transformation. Germany still struggles with extremism, and former Nazis who claimed reform often disappointed. But enough transformation to break the cycle, to choose democracy over fascism, to say never again and mean it. We can follow the path of post-war Germany, doing the hard work of education, accountability, and reconciliation. The choice isn't just for the politicians or activists. It's for everybody. Every time we challenge hate, teach accurate history, support democracy, or help someone leave extremism behind, we're choosing which path America takes. Germany's story teaches us that societies can recover from their darkest moments, but only through sustained effort, painful honesty, and ordinary people making extraordinary choices. The question isn't whether America can defeat extremism. Germany proved it's possible. The question is whether individuals have the courage, patience, and wisdom to do what it takes. The Spruchkammer courts remind us that transformation rarely comes from grand gestures or perfect systems. It comes from millions of small acts. Filling out a questionnaire honestly, asking an uncomfortable question, teaching a difficult truth, offering forgiveness, choosing hope over hate. This is how democracy survives. Not through its strength, but through citizens who strengthen it. Not through its perfection, but through people who perfect it. Not through defeating all enemies, but through turning enemies into citizens. Germany shows us it's possible. History is watching to see if America learns the lesson. Thanks for listening.